Okay, thank you both for those wonderful presentations. Let's start on that last little technology that Catherine took us into quickly. Sorry, Tiz took us into quickly. Catherine, I want to ask you, robots.
Yes.
Robots and AI was one of the headings on Tiz's slides.
Yeah.
The robot world, and that little insight you gave us then, robots and AI, what's your take on those as technological disruptors?
I'm followed by Chip on Twitter. Chip started following me on Twitter.
Okay.
And I almost tweeted, I've just been followed by a robot on Twitter, and I thought that was a bit meta, so I didn't. I actually think that, there's a lot of fear, and Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking, all these people have sort of said, superintelligence, AI, even Bill Gates has said, superintelligence is kind of the end of human race as we know it. And you know what, that's fine, maybe we just welcome the robot overlords, and just enjoy the experience. But to be true, with Moore's law eating itself, so now we're actually going to be using quantum computing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, they're going to be doing incredibly intelligent things. Even if we hit the singularity, which is where we get that supercomputer that's the power of all the human brains on the planet, we've all got that one friend that's incredibly, incredibly intelligent, but really has no common sense, haven't we? And so it's the idea is we can have this big super brain, but unless we train it and teach it and start with Asimov's law of robotics, then these things are actually going to be quite useless. It's actually what you apply them for that's really exciting. I think that the robotics for the health industry is going to be huge. We're looking at having robots read books to kids in libraries across Queensland. So this kind of human robotic interface, I think, is a place where some beautiful, magical things could happen, and technology can make us more human.
One of the aspects of artificial intelligence that's really interesting at the moment is machine learning, so systems that, as they do things more and more often, get better at doing those systems. I spoke quickly about chess. There's a game called Go. It's a Chinese, Malaysian, Korean board game. I won't go into the details of it, but it's a lot of fun. But remarkably simple game with its rules, but incredibly complicated for just how many different games, positions you could play and that sort of stuff. And we thought for a long time that Go was a level of complexity beyond computers. They could beat us at chess, but it could be a couple of decades before they could beat us at this game called Go. Towards the end of last year, Google released a program called AlphaGo, which played a pretty handy player and beat them, and then said in March of this year it was going to play the best guy in the world. And in October of last year, the best guy in the world was going, bring it on, I'm going to school this machine, I can't wait. After 3 games in March of this year, when the world champion was down 3 games to 0 and said, quote, I don't want to play anymore, end quote. So what had happened was, this thing was just a completely different level in March of this year to where it was October last year. And it hadn't been programmed, no one had taught it. What had happened in those 6 months, the machine had gone away and played tens of millions of games of Go against parallel versions of itself, and got better. And in that 6 months, it evolved to a level that it was completely different concept to what had been presented 6 months earlier. That machine learning is really exciting. Someone just asked on the question facility there, rather than driverless cars, Catherine, do you see driverless commuter drones?
They already exist.
Coming along.
So some were released last year from a Chinese company at a tech show there in 2015. They exist, but the infrastructure for them to be able to operate doesn't yet exist. And this is where I've even talked about as having gargoyles. We're going to have gargoyles back again. So the Victorians built them on property in the UK to keep away evil spirits. But our gargoyles will be power stations and communication stations for our drones. It's a bit Blade Runner, isn't it? It's a bit Minority Report, some of the things you were talking about. So some of the science fiction that we've seen in the last 20, 30 years is actually becoming science fact.
So the drones that we have now, are we pretty much at what drone technology is going to be? Or will 10, 20 years from now, will they evolve into things that you don't even recognise compared to today?
Yeah, so biomimicry is huge now in engineering. So people are looking back to Mother Nature to actually get inspiration for the next level of technology. So the next stage now is autonomous swarming drones that actually talk to each other without talking to anybody else. And so, yeah, drones the size of flies, and drones the size, well, if you think the International Space Station is technically a drone, it's controlled by Houston. And so, yeah, we don't even know what this is going to start looking like. Hybrid drones have started coming online. They were always traditionally either fixed wing or multi-rotor helicopters. Now you've got vertical takeoff within a fixed wing flight capability. So biomimicry is going to help speed that up quite a lot, I think. We're going back to Mother Nature.
I talked about some retail and the future of retail. I presume through CBA you've seen a lot of where that's already at. You have something like the Albert program that you guys sort of revolutionised, point of sale retail. Talk us through Albert and that whole experience, and more generally what you're seeing in retail.
Yeah, I guess the example that you actually gave, where you're walking into a shopping center and then you get a text message saying, would you like to purchase a pair of shoes, is absolutely already here. So we've piloted that into shopping centers in New South Wales with Centre Group. And essentially we've actually been able to understand is where you've abandoned your cart online. So if you were looking at a t-shirt and then you had to leave for some reason because it was lunchtime and what's called what you've abandoned cart, we can then remind you when you're physically in the store that would have been a t-shirt that you were interested in and that it's not now on sale. So that is already happening, and you're going to start to get personalized loyalty. And again, this is something that you can opt in and out of, so it's not necessarily mandatory for everyone to be able to receive. And essentially, this personalized shopping experience, or the experience in general, is absolutely what people are looking for. So if they're going to come into the store, it better be a more enhanced experience than what they're getting online. Coming in and finding out that their size is not available or the color that they want is not there is not an enhanced experience. It's actually detracting. So we just need to be mindful of all multi-channels or omni-channel experiences, particularly in retail.
With something like Albert that you bring, there's a spectrum there from the moment you think you've got a product, you could just get it out there to make sure you beat everyone, through to you could wait years until you have road tested it 1 trillion times and there's no conceivable problem with it. Neither of those are desirable.
Yes.
How do you decide when to go with something as radical as that device, knowing that there's probably going to be some teething problems that you won't know about till it's actually out there? What's the testing profile and the sort of launch protocols around something like that?
So we had over 1,000 prototypes of Albert before we actually released.
1,000?
Thousands, yeah. Before we released the one that you see today. And it was made from styrofoam and wood and plastic, various components, obviously, from low fidelity to high fidelity. But for example, we were convinced initially on the project that we wanted to have a tilting mechanism that when you put in your PIN number, the store observer couldn't see it. Because we were convinced that when we saw people, it was like this dancing game, or the store clerk didn't know where to look, and the customer didn't want them to see the PIN number. And so we thought this tilting mechanism would be fantastic. And so we built that in the initial stages of our prototype, but it was actually terrible. Didn't sit well on the desk. No one really liked it. Tap and go was really taking shape, so no one was even putting in PIN numbers. So essentially we made away with that, which would have cost us an enormous amount to have built in and made it very clunky. So that's just an example of if we had built it to the spec or to the architecture that we had originally anticipated, we probably would have not been as successful as we are now. But the real beauty of Albert is the platform that it sits on. So it sits on Pi, and Pi is an open source platform. And basically what that means is that anybody in this audience who has an idea can develop an app that sits on Albert, similar to the Apple Store, or to the Google Playlist. So essentially, the evolution of what Albert can do is unknown yet. We have over 35 apps on it now, and it is a bit chicken and egg. We want, a lot of developers are making sure that it's in enough stores before they spend the money doing the app development. But now we're in over 135 locations, and so 1,000 obviously locations, and so essentially it's attractive for developers to now develop, and we've just launched the Albert product in France, and it's being picked up by some international banks. So you will see the expansion of the device itself internationally, which is very exciting for a local Australian developer.
Great question that's just come through. The Samsung, anyone who's flown on a plane recently knows that now if you've even met someone who owns a Samsung Galaxy 7, they won't let you on a plane for fear that you might explode. Mega fail, and you don't want to pick on them, you don't want to humiliate them, but question is, how can a company so large get something like that wrong? Either of you got any thoughts on that? I don't want to bash up on Samsung, but it is fascinating when you see something like that and the brand damage that's been incurred as a result.
Yeah, I think it goes back to your question. So there are elements of the Albert terminal, for example, that we were absolutely not going to release without testing multiple times over and over again, and that is the security of your PIN. So we actually piloted, trialed, and we now own the IP for the glass where you put your fingerprint, where your fingerprints cannot be read or taken off. That took us probably 18 months longer than we had originally anticipated, and really slowed down the launch of our product. But there was 3 or 4 areas where we, as an organization, knew our core value is trust, and we actually couldn't put forward a product that we thought was going to hinder that trust. So for us, we were very diligent about what that looked like up front. With Samsung, perhaps they didn't actually anticipate what some of the you have to put it in different environments. So, for example, we were dropping Alberts from ladders and
Can I
putting it in
work
water.
with you for a while the next time you're doing that?
Yeah,
Throw
absolutely.
things out of hotel windows.
And that's what you need to do to test it, to learn, to see. So it's like, what scenarios could they have put the phone through? And what are the extreme scenarios? I'm not saying that they didn't do that, but essentially that's how we...
I think, yeah, a number of niches failed there. And I think it reminds me very much of the Ford Pinto case. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but Ford Pinto case was they found that there was a fault. They worked out how much it was going to cost to fix the fault. They worked out how many people it was going to kill. They worked out how much it was going to cost to compensate the people that it killed. The initial economic survey suggested that it was easier to let people die in terms of cost. The moral people, humans in the room, decided, no, that's not a price that anyone is willing to pay. And it damaged the Ford brand incredibly badly. Ford are still around, despite everything going on in the States the way it has been. I suggest Samsung have been rushing at it too far, too fast, and QA/QC is absolutely fundamental to, power storage. I mean, batteries are getting smaller. They're a thing that's helping shrink the size of drones, shrink the size of our laptops, our computers, and our phones, but they're now holding an awful amount of power in a very small place. That's the one thing that you really want to make sure that you get right. Someone has dropped the ball there hugely in terms of risk ranking the race versus the safety, and I hope they investigate and find out what happened. Samsung have done some great innovations, and it's a sad thing to show that this has happened, but really, up the game, please. This is not really...
Someone says...